So there's a Texas man, and he's facing an accusation right now of murdering his wife. Not just his wife, his pregnant wife. And as we speak, everything should have been getting all cooking for a trial in a Houston courtroom. Prosecutors are supposed to be laying out a case against this fella, and a jury is supposed to decide whether he killed his pregnant wife, the person with whom he shared a home and had 2 young children and a baby on the way. That wife was 38-year-old Christa Gilly. That husband is 38-year-old Lee Gilly. And instead of being in that courtroom facing that accusation that he did that to the mother of his 2 kids and the expectant 3rd kid, Lee Gilly is instead in Italy. I know, right? Wouldn't we all like to be in Italy right now, right? Especially if
A woman is found dead in a $1 million home in Houston 5 days before her husband is set to stand trial for capital murder. Except by the time that trial date arrives, the husband isn't in the courtroom. He's not in Texas. He's not even in the country. He's in Italy, arguing that the country that jails serial killers for life without parole is somehow the wrong place to punish him. Picture this: an ankle monitor, cut clean, lying on a bedroom floor in Houston Heights. The last physical trace of a man who was supposed to face 12 Texas jurors and instead chose 2 international borders and a fake Belgian passport. That single image, a severed GPS strap, is the entire story in miniature. A man built an escape route out of the very system designed to guarantee justice for a pregnant woman who never got to explain what happened to her. Before we go deeper into what the evidence actually shows, make sure you're subscribed to Channel Name. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the facts. Here's what we know and what we can verify. Christa Gilly was 38 years old, a physical therapist, a mother of 2, roughly 2 months pregnant with a
Christa
3rd
Gilly
child.
was just 38. She was a physical therapist, mom of 2 little kids, and was expecting. She had another baby along the way, and I think she was around 2 months pregnant. And Lee and Christa Gilly lived in a home in the Houston Heights area, fancy home, very expensive, just over $1 million for their home. So, not too bad. Their kids are 3 and 5, and their life just looked great, right? It looked like what many families work towards. Christa had built a career as a physical therapist. Lee was working as a software consultant. And as I just mentioned, baby number 3 was on the way in this lovely Houston suburb. What could possibly go wrong? But on Monday,
in October of 2024, her husband, Lee Gilly, also 38, called 911 and reported that she wasn't breathing.
On Monday, October 7th, 2024, late in the evening, inside the couple's home, something did go wrong because Lee Gilly called 911 and said that his pregnant wife was not breathing. So, of course, paramedics get there as fast as they can, and they grab her and they take her to Memorial Hermann Greater Heights Hospital. Doctors tried to save her life, but unfortunately she was pronounced dead by early the next morning. Lee reportedly told the police that Christa may have overdosed or may have taken her own life, but the doctors saw something a little different. Yeah. When the medical examiner and the doctors took a closer look, they found injuries that kind of said it was not what Lee was telling them. According to the medical examiner, Christa did not die from drugs or suicide or some unexplained medical crisis. They say she died from compression on her neck and upper back, a.k.a. strangulation.
Paramedics rushed her to Memorial Hermann. She was pronounced dead the next morning. The initial account offered was overdose, possibly self-inflicted. But a medical examiner doesn't work from what a husband says on the phone. A medical examiner works from the body, and the body told a different story. Compression injuries to the neck and upper back, consistent with strangulation, along with bruising and trauma to the face. A homicide, not an accident, not a suicide. 4 days later, Lee Gilly was arrested and charged, not with murder, but with capital murder, a charge that in Texas exists specifically because Christa was carrying their child. Under Texas Penal Code, killing a pregnant woman elevates the crime to the state's most severe category.
Her death was ruled a homicide, not a suicide, not an accident, right? And just 4 days after Christa died, I guess there was enough evidence for probable cause because Lee Gilly was arrested, and he was charged with not just murder, capital murder. Capital murder. And the capital part of it stems from the fact that Christa was pregnant. And under Texas law, that charge can expose a defendant to either the death penalty or life without the possibility of parole. If you want to look it up, be my guest. It's Texas Penal Code 1903. And intentionally murdering an individual who is pregnant or killing more than one person, including an unborn child at any stage of the gestation, that constitutes capital murder in the state of Texas. And that crime is punishable upon conviction by either the death penalty or LWOP, life without the possibility of parole. So I like to call it toe tag parole because it means you're not coming out of that institution unless there's a toe tag on your gurney. So
one that carries exactly two possible outcomes upon conviction execution, or life in prison with no chance of ever walking out. That's the legal ceiling. That's what the state was prepared to seek. And here's the first crack of irony in this case. Despite facing that ceiling, a judge granted bond, $1 million. High by most standards, unremarkable for a man who owned a home worth over $1 million himself. He surrendered his passport. He wore a monitor. He was, on paper, accounted for every hour of every day.
So what happened after his arrest is one of the first major questions in this case, because despite facing the most serious charge, right, capital murder, serious, doesn't get more serious in the state of Texas or anywhere else, he was given bond. Judge granted bond. The amount was big. I mean, it was a very high bond, $1 million, which is really a lot, but not when you're, not when you're on the upper echelons, and they had $1 million plus home. And so when Lee Gilly was released, the court placed him under strict conditions. He surrendered his passport. That's important. He was ordered to remain in Texas, natch, and he had a GPS monitor attached to his ankle so that the authorities could track his location. So in theory, Lee wasn't going anywhere without the court knowing about it. In theory.
He killed her, and the system let him keep his freedom while he waited. That's the phrase to hold on to, because it's going to come back. While out on bond, prosecutors say they were assembling a motive. Reddit posts, allegedly written by Gilly months before Christa's death, described a man bored in his marriage, seeking younger women, including a college-age partner for casual relationships.
And while he was out on bond, the prosecutors continued building the case that they planned to present to a jury. According to the court documents, the investigators believe that some of those Reddit posts that he allegedly wrote months before Christa died, apparently they are clear and convincing motive for murder in the eyes of the prosecutors, because in those posts, the writer, presumably Mr. Gilly, described himself as bored in his marriage and interested in meeting younger women, including a college-aged woman for a casual sexual relationship. Ooh, that in the business is what we call bad facts. Not bad for prosecutors, bad for defendant. And that wasn't it.
Court records reportedly also detail a financial dispute, an SUV purchased without his wife's knowledge, a fight that followed. None of this proves murder on its own. Prosecutors don't need it to. What it does is build a pattern, a narrative arc that a jury was supposed to hear in full, evidence tested and cross-examined in open court. That was the plan. May 1st, 2026, days before the trial, the plan collapsed.
So May 1st, 2026, just before the trial is set to begin, what does Lee Gilly do? He up and vanishes. Authorities say he cut off the GPS monitor that had been tracing him since his release, and he fled the country. He took off. He got out of Dodge, any other way you want to describe it. And the fact that he escaped at all is pretty remarkable, actually, because this is not somebody whose location was supposed to be a mystery. The court had taken his passport. They'd imposed travel restrictions. They'd placed him under electronic supervision, specifically because he was charged with capital murder. But by the time the officials realized what had happened, he was no longer just hiding out somewhere in Houston or even Texas or even America.
Ask yourself, what does a man do when the walls of the courtroom start closing in and he has both the motive and the money to make them disappear? Lee Gilly cut the monitor.
But the prosecutors say that just before the capital murder trial was supposed to begin, and yes, capital murder, you'll find out why in a moment, Lee Gilly, who was out on bond. I know. How are you facing capital murder and you're out on bond? We'll get there. Lee Gilly cut off his GPS monitor. Oh, how did that happen? He was strapped to his ankle, he cut it off, and he got out of Dodge. And when I say Dodge, I mean the United States. And he went from the United States to Canada using a fake ID.
He crossed into Canada using falsified identification. Two of the country's largest cities, Toronto or Montreal, according to the record, and from there, a flight to Milan. Not vacation. A second forged document, this time claiming Belgian citizenship under the name Jane Luc Olivier, carried him across a second international border.
They say he had actually gone over the Canadian border, passing through Toronto or Montreal. Again, that should be traceable. We will know that once there's more court activity. But yeah, he went through either one of two of the biggest Canadian cities, and then got on a flight for Milan. So I am still dying to find out how he crossed the Canadian border. It isn't easy. No, it's not. Unless you go on foot, because that will definitely get you over easy, you know? So I will really be interested to find out how he got to the airport that took him to Italy. But honest to goodness, you don't have to fly into Canada to get into Canada. You can go overland. You can go through roads and, official crossings. And then there are a lot of places that you can cross, kind of like the Texas border, where you can just walk and struggle. And I'm wondering if that's what he did, because it is not easy to go through an official border crossing with fake documents when you get into Canada. So I'll be interested to find out how he got into Canada, but then he got on a plane and he did get himself to Italy. But when he presented his ID there to the border police in Milan, that's when the shit hit the fan for him. The border police said, sorry, no. And he was denied entry by the Italian authorities. They said that Lee was carrying forged Belgian identification and a fake Belgian passport. And the name that he apparently chose to have on his passport is quite delightful.
It was that name, that second forgery, that finally stopped him. Italian border police denied him entry and placed him in custody.
Fake passport. You can't get into Canada without a passport. So he got himself a fake passport and he went to Canada. But he didn't stop there. He got another flight to Milan, and not for Fashion Week. He forged Belgian documents, got himself those travel documents, and made his way to Italy. Milan, Italy. But the authorities caught up with him. They caught him in Italy, put him in handcuffs, put him in a jail cell, and then came the negotiation with the Americans.
He killed her, and then he built a new identity to outrun her memory. Once in custody, Gilly did something almost nobody expects from a man merely protesting his innocence. He didn't ask to go home and clear his name. He requested asylum stadi.
Once Lee arrived in Italy, he did not continue to pretend to be le jeune Jean-Luc Olivier. He acknowledged who he actually was. And he admitted that he was awaiting trial for murder in Texas. And then he did it. He requested political asylum. Which still blows my mind, because it's like, political asylum? You want legal asylum. It's not your politics. You just don't want to die. You don't want to spend the rest of your life in prison. That's not politics. That's just, I don't want to have a shitty punishment. And he reportedly argued that he fled because he feared he couldn't receive a fair trial in the U.S. I don't understand that either. You were being given a trial in your state with a jury of your peers. What was unfair about it? It is the process. He argued that returning to Texas could expose him to the death penalty. You chose to live in Texas. Under the criminal code that existed there, death penalty's on the table. So fair trial? I don't get that part. I get that you don't like the death penalty because you're facing it. But fair? Anyway, it created a whole batch of problems for the Texas prosecutors, because Italy, in that country, they don't have capital punishment, right? they also don't have life without parole. So they generally, this is not weird, I've seen this many times before, countries that don't have the death penalty generally won't extradite someone to a country that does have the death penalty unless they promise, sign a waiver that they will not seek the death penalty if you send our guy back.
Arguing that returning to Texas would expose him to the death penalty, and more strikingly, to life without parole, a punishment Italy itself does not recognize under its own penal code.
He asked the Italians to protect him from the big, bad United States. He said to the Italians, if I go back to the United States, I'm going to face a death penalty and maybe even life without parole. Isn't that terrible for this heinous and atrocious crime that I'm accused of committing? And wait till you hear the details, because I don't think it's much of an accusation. I think it is slam dunk. But he's asking the Italians, hey, help me get a break here. Hold on to me here, because I want to fight extradition back to the U.S., okay? And I want to fight the extradition based on the fact that you in Italy, you don't subscribe to the death penalty. We've heard that before, right? And it often works. But he went a step further. And this is the one that gets him a craw. He said to the Italians, you also don't subscribe to life without the possibility of parole in this country. You believe in the possibility of parole, even for people who kill their pregnant wives. And again, he's alleged it hasn't been proven in a court of law. And guess what? The Italians are like on board. They're demanding assurances from the Texans that they will take the death penalty off the table. Again, we've heard that before. It's not unusual for other countries to do that. It happens all the time. But they also want the Texans to take the life without parole possibility off the table as well, if he's convicted.
Italy has heard the death penalty argument before from other fugitives in other cases. Nations that reject capital punishment routinely require a waiver before extradition. That part isn't new. What is unprecedented based on the public record here is the second demand.
So basically what the Italians are saying is, we're not going to send him back. We are not going to deliver you one Lee Gilly, who's accused of killing Christa Gilly, unless you promise us you won't go so hard on him. Wait till I get the details out here. Of the way Christa was killed, because going easy on him if he did this is the last thing I think any of us is really going to want to happen. So I will get to the negotiation part and what the possibilities are and what's likely to happen and what's likely not to happen in a minute. But Christa Gilly.
That Texas also abandoned the possibility of a life sentence with no parole eligibility before Italy will even consider sending him back. Think about what that means. A private citizen accused of strangling his pregnant wife in their own home may end up dictating the sentencing terms available to an American court. Not through a verdict, but through a border crossing. An Italian appeals court has since issued a temporary block on the extradition request.
They did it anyway. The Italians said both. They said, hey, Texas, we have your guy. We'll send him back. But you got to take both of these things off the table. You got to take death and LWOP, life without the possibility of parole. Do what now? So before Harris County, Texas can put Lee Gilly on trial for Christa Gilly's violent and vicious murder, pregnant with their baby, Texas may have to promise a whole other country that it will completely change the way it does criminal business. And it will change the kind of punishment that it seeks. Not just death penalty, which is standard, and they do that, but the other thing too. Life without the possibility of parole. This is an extraordinary position for a state to be in. And now in the latest turn, an Italian appeals court has temporarily blocked the U.S. and their request to extradite Gilly back to Texas. The court is demanding these assurances that if he's returned and convicted, he will not face death and he will not spend the rest of his life in prison without a chance to get out. So the block, to be clear, is not permanent. It's just temporary. They're basically saying, we'll do business with you, but, we're putting our line in the sand. And
pending assurances from Texas that neither the death penalty nor life without parole will be pursued if Gilly is convicted. Temporary, not permanent. A pause, not a resolution. And in that pause, 2 children, 3 and 5 years old.
For now, though, every one of the questions is kind of just frozen in time because Lee is sitting in Italy. The extradition fight is moving through the foreign courts and it's a bit slow. And Christa's family is waiting for justice. They're waiting to learn whether this case is ever going to make it back to Houston and into a courtroom. And while that fight plays out, there's a whole other painful legal battle surrounding their children. Because remember I said that Lee and Christa had 2 kids? Yeah, those 2 kids are still, right? Christa's parents have been looking after them, reportedly granted custody or conservatorship. And the families have been fighting over whether the kids should live with them or with Lee's parents, and what kind of contact should Lee's relatives have, right? It's very messy.
Are living the actual consequence of this legal chess match. Their mother is gone. Their father is in a jail cell across an ocean, awaiting a decision that could keep him there indefinitely or send him home to face a courtroom that no longer has the tools it was built with. There's also a federal dimension few are talking about. Fleeing prosecution, using forged travel documents to cross 2 international borders. These are federal crimes in their own right, entirely separate from the state's capital murder charge, and they carry no overlap with double jeopardy. A defendant can be tried by Texas for the killing and separately by the federal government for the flight. If convicted on both fronts, sentences can run consecutively, not concurrently.
But there's a card that they can play. They can just work out something with the feds. I'm going to get to that in a minute because it's actually really crafty and smart, and I think it may be the way they're going to go, so stand by for that. Lee is also facing a federal charge, right, for fleeing prosecution after he cut the ankle monitor and escaped to Italy using those forged Belgian documents. And if he's eventually brought back to Texas, the prosecutors are almost certain to tell the jury that he did this. This is the pickle that we've been in. He buggered off, and he cheated, and he lied, and he did all these awful things, and ran off to Italy. And that's not going to sit well with the jury. Like, flight alone doesn't prove guilt. I mean, we all run from something we're scared of, even if we didn't do it. But it doesn't look good. And the prosecutors are going to say it's not just that he was scared. It shows he was he had consciousness of guilt. That's why he ran. It's a good argument that both sides can make. But again, the juries don't like to hear it. People don't like to hear that you took off, you ran, and you caused everybody all this distress and hassle, right? And you did it right as the trial was approaching, too.
Meaning even if Italy succeeds in forcing life without parole off the table, federal ad on time could functionally produce the same result. It just takes longer to get there, and it takes more paperwork to justify it. He killed her, and the paperwork is now the only thing standing between accountability and a diplomatic stalemate. What remains unresolved is not guilt or innocence. A jury hasn't heard the case, and under the law, Lee Gilly is still presumed innocent until that happens. What remains unresolved is whether the country he tried to disappear in gets to redefine what justice looks like for a killing that happened entirely within Texas's jurisdiction. That's not a question with an obvious answer. That's a live negotiation happening right now between a state government and a foreign court over the body of a case that hasn't even reached trial. If you want to follow this yourself, the underlying charging documents and bond conditions in this case are part of the public record through the Harris County District Clerk's Office, searchable under the Gilly case number once formally docketed for trial. Read them. Then tell us in the comments. Should any country be allowed to set the sentencing terms for a crime that happened entirely on American soil? If this breakdown gave you clarity you couldn't find anywhere else, like this video, share it, subscribe to channel AIM Name Key, and turn on notifications, because we'll be following this extradition fight and every document that surfaces until there's an actual answer.